Well, once again, we find ourselves at the end of the season for regional amusement parks. The 50th anniversary season for Kings Island was one for the books, and I'm really sad to see it go. It's definitely been one of the best I can remember. The park looked beautiful, the fun, fireworks, and 50 show was a stellar, nearly 15-minute long finale to cap off each night, and in general, I think this was just a great year to visit this incredible park. That being said, I do have notes. KI Coaster Guy here, and in this video, we're going to be going over some things I'd like to see happen at Kings Island in 2023 and beyond. This will by no means be an exhaustive list, so feel free to make your own suggestions down in the comment section below. The general idea is for this to be a yearly video, so while the spirit of this is to stick mostly to minor changes that could reasonably occur over a season, for this first installment, I'm gonna fudge that a bit in a few places and mention a couple of longer term things I'd like to see. Another quick disclaimer, all of this is going to be from a consumer perspective, and as such, this list is about what I think would improve the experience for the guest. I haven't vetted my list beforehand to make sure everything I'm suggesting would provide absolute maximum value to the shareholders, because that's not my job, and it's probably not yours either. Oh, don't worry. They have people for that. So if you're going to reply with something about how Cedar Fair has a duty to their shareholders and whether or not something makes business sense, go ahead, but just know, I don't really care. For the most part, these are going to be fun suggestions I think will make the experience better for park goers, and at the end of the video, I'm going to be talking about some changes I think absolutely need to be made for the health and safety of the guests coming through, so stay tuned for that. So first off, I want to talk about Backwards Racer, and this one I'm mostly including for my subscribers because last year I asked you guys what you most wanted to see the park change season over season, and even though I never ended up making that video in 2021 like I had planned, bringing back the Backwards Racer was by far the most popular response. So even though I personally think it's highly unlikely we'll see this attraction return anytime in the near future, it seemed appropriate to talk about it here as something Kings Island fans would really like to see, myself included. One popular explanation I've heard for why Backwards Racer was retired is that the producer of the trains, Philadelphia Toboggan Company, took issue with Kings Island running them backwards as it put stress on the track and the trains themselves that they weren't really designed for, but I've never been able to confirm this. If that is the case though, it's possible that running the racer backwards again could potentially necessitate modifications to be made to the trains, but I'm not an engineer, so that's as far as I'm going to go with that speculation. For their part, Kings Island has seemed to imply that they could absolutely run the racer backwards again, but simply have no plans to do so, which is essentially how Chad Showalter responded when I emailed him to ask him about this. Either way, I don't think we'll be seeing this classic attraction return anytime soon, but who knows? The park is well aware there is interest there, and maybe it's something they have in their back pocket for a rainy day. Never say never. Moving on, like I said earlier, this is a video I plan to do every single year at the end of the season, focusing on season-to-season changes. And here in the very first one, I'm already going to break my own rule and start talking about a new attraction that is likely still a couple of years out. But folks, I think it's time to talk about the Vortex plot. As of right now, it's been 3 years since Vortex closed, and we have this big area of the park that used to be one of the most beautiful locations looking, well, kinda crappy. I've heard all kinds of rumors and speculation about where the next coaster will go, and some are even saying they hope they just turn this area where Vortex was into a new land in the park with a bunch of flat rides and things of that nature, but I really disagree. I'd much rather them do that somewhere else. In my opinion, they got it right the first 2 times, and a coaster really is the highest and best use for this particular location in the park. A coaster here would once again create a fantastic backdrop for a part of the park where people often go to take a breather and grab something to eat, complete with perfect photo opportunities. In addition, with the way this plot of land is graded, it just doesn't really make sense to me that they do anything else with it. In any case, now that we're a few years out from Vortex closing and the debut of Orion, I really do hope Kings Island plans to do something with this space soon and get rid of that privacy fence. I'm really hoping this happens by 2025, but we'll see. Moving on, another thing I'd really like to see is daily operations extended until Labor Day weekend next year. When I started working on this video, that seemed a little less possible than it does now, with Carowinds and King's Dominion having announced year-round operations. Cedar Fair leadership has expressed a desire the last couple of years to keep more of their employees at full time, rather than having to recruit an entire staff every year, so I think that 2023 would be a great year to extend daily operations like this. This would really provide additional value for pass holders and is something that Kings Island used to do, and I think it would be celebrated upon its return. Next up, we have some cosmetic issues it would be nice to see addressed. First one being to get the Banshee fog machine up and running more consistently again. It's always sad to me when parks let cool things like this just kind of fall by the wayside over the years, and in my opinion, the Banshee entrance plaza is one of the best in the chain, so it's a shame to me that I don't think I saw the fog at the sign running even once during any of my visits this past season. In addition to that, I think it's about time for Diamondback to receive a new paint job. The good news on that front is that at the Coaster Stock Q&A, Mike Kuntz did mention that getting Diamondback repainted for 2023 was something he was hoping to do. Now, whether or not the request to spend that money will be granted in time for next season, who knows, but it's good to know it's at least on their radar. And while we're on the subject of paint jobs, Banshee is starting to look a little rough in that regard as well, but I imagine it'll still be a few years before they start thinking about that. And now for something completely different, let's talk about one thing I would just like to see the park maintain, and that's keeping Coaster Stock as a limited event geared towards enthusiasts. I went to Coaster Stock for the first time in 2022, and they are putting on a fantastic event here. That weekend was the highlight of my entire Kings Island season, and all I'd like for Kings Island to do is keep it more or less the way it is and not screw it up. In addition to neat things like behind-the-scenes tours and the lunchtime Q&A, the real treat of this event, in my opinion, is the ERT. Coaster Stock ERT is a fantastic opportunity to get the chance to marathon many of the park's rides with almost no wait. Each segment of ERT at this event is like being a kid in a candy store for a couple of hours and is absolutely a big part of why people are so excited to go. All of this in contrast to Cedar Point's event, Coaster Mania, that has clearly become nothing but a soulless cash grab. They removed the restriction that you had to be a member of an enthusiast group to join, and in typical Cedar Point fashion, way oversold the event. All day, you could see people complaining about long lines for ERT and a poorly planned out schedule. Even worse, this year's Coaster Mania fell on a day the park closed several hours early for a special event, a transparent attempt to try and squeeze an additional $100 or so out of Coaster Mania attendees so they could stay the extra few hours for Wild Frontier nights, which is just kinda crappy. Alright, real quick before we continue, I'm excited to say we are very near 2,000 subs on the channel now, and I am extremely grateful for all of your support thus far. If you like what you see here, consider subscribing for more content like this, and of course, leaving a like rating is the most helpful thing you can do for the channel, if you feel so inclined, that is. Now, moving on, I'd really like to see the park add some kind of condition for being able to attend the pass holder preview event. In the past, this event was meant as an added bonus for people who renewed passes they already had, but is now so loose that you can actually just purchase your pass at the park that day and gain entry for the preview. I think you would definitely end up with a better event for the guests if there was at least a cutoff date, say, I don't know, a couple weeks beforehand that you'd have to have your pass renewed by in order to gain entry. Now, of course, I can't see Kings Island ever doing this. Unfortunately, pass holder preview has sort of just dissolved into opening day for anyone who plans to buy a pass instead of a special incentive for those that renew. This has resulted in major crowds and extremely long lines at a time when many of the park's associates are brand spanking new at their jobs. I don't have to explain what a terrible combination that is. And for the past couple of years, I've just completely ignored pass holder preview in order to avoid having this experience. On to the next one, and I'm gonna be straight up with you, it's kind of a nitpick. All right, I'd be the first to admit I am probably in the minority on caring about this, and that's the music they play on International Street. Now hear me out. I'm sure many of you remember that until recently, they used to play this kind of epic, soaring stuff that sounded really cinematic. In fact, much of it was actually taken taken from film scores. And it really just took that entry experience to the next level, in my opinion. I think it was in 2020, they changed it up to be classical renditions of modern pop songs, which was okay, but definitely not as good. But then in 2022, they, for whatever reason, went into this jazzy, almost ragtime thing with the music that I just was not a fan of. I really hope that was just for the anniversary, because I was not feeling that at all. If Kings Island was closed and sold off tomorrow to some company that wanted to turn it into an Amazon fulfillment center or something, one thing that would stick with me for the rest of my life from that park would be the way it feels to go through those turnstiles and then re-emerge from under the International Restaurant to the epic surroundings of International Street and the Royal Fountain, with the Eiffel Tower replica straight ahead. In my opinion, the older music really enhanced this effect. The classical pop sounds were worse, but still sort of did the trick, but the ragtime, in my opinion, served only to diminish this effect, and therefore I would love to enter the park for the first time in 2023 to some epic music that helps to really bring home that experience. Another point I heard a lot of from you all is that Action Zone is in need of a refresh, and I agree. Obviously, that's not something that's going to happen for 2023, especially considering they've already announced a new themed area just outside of Action Zone with Adventure Port. But it's been quite some time now since this area had some attention, and as they continue to improve other areas of the park, it's only going to look more and more dated. This is one of those areas where we're kind of fudging what the scope of the video is here, but just something to keep an eye on over the next couple seasons. And finally, there are a few interconnected issues regarding the health and safety of Kings Island guests I believe need to be dealt with. And one of those is that there is just far too much exposed midway and queue, not just at Kings Island, but in a lot of the parks throughout the chain. The vast majority of the season takes place during the hottest days of the year, and not only is it uncomfortable to spend so much time frying in the sun, it's really not good for you, lest you forget, melanoma is a thing. Particularly in the queues, which can move really slow during the busiest days, there really needs to be more shade structures. The worst offender of any park in the chain that I've been to so far would probably have to be Knott's Berry Farm or Cedar Point. On my trip to Knott's a couple years back, I wasn't carrying anything with me into the park, and though I did apply sunscreen before going in, I was still absolutely burnt to a crisp to the point of nearly feeling sick, as there is just next to no shade throughout most of that park. I know a lot of you don't wear sunscreen, and that's a personal choice, totally up to you, but the parks themselves shouldn't be making policies that make it harder for those that do. And that brings us into the loose article policy at many Cedar Fair parks, which is something I really think exacerbates this issue. Many of the new rides built at Cedar Fair parks within the last few years are requiring that you either leave your bags or fanny packs with a non-rider, or more likely for most people, rent a locker. If you've ever been in Boy Scouts, or maybe you're into running or hiking, you'll know it's really just common sense that whenever you're doing any kind of activity outdoors where you're walking around a lot in the heat, you really should be carrying a bottle of water with you and some sunscreen at a minimum. The fact that Cedar Fair has decided to take the fact that people carry things into the park as an opportunity to monetize what used to be just bins on a ride platform, therefore, is not a good thing. People should not be disincentivized to bring water and sunscreen into a park with little shade during the hottest days of the year, especially considering if you don't have a water bottle with you, your only options to rehydrate without spending any money are to stop at a drinking fountain. Not ideal. You should definitely be drinking more water than you reasonably can that way during the day, or you can get some water in a little Dixie cup if you wait in line at a food stand for it, which is the third part of this little trifecta here. Dispensing water out to guests into a cup full of ice that to begin with is only marginally larger than the little Dixie cups people might put in a bathroom for rinsing after brushing your teeth is not going to cut it, especially when it's 90 degrees outside. And you can't even get water at any of the refresh stations stations, unless you have a drink plan. You could choose to get water that way, but you have to actually wait in line at a food stand otherwise, which can take quite a while. All of this together is not great, and whether you believe it or not, this really is something that can be a real safety hazard. I'd be very interested in seeing how many people are treated for sunstroke or heat exhaustion in first aid stations at amusement parks every year. You could make an entire video on just this topic, but to wrap it up here, something needs to change with the loose article policy at Kings Island and throughout the industry in general to make it easier for people to carry water and sunscreen at a minimum with them into the queues of rides. I don't know what the solution is there now, but whether it's cubbies on the platform to allow for small bags or something like the lockers at Steel Vengeance, there needs to be something done. Cedar Fair created the situation, so I think we can leave it to them to uncreate it. In addition, for guests that don't have a water bottle, there needs to be a better way to get some water. People shouldn't have to wait in a 10-minute line for not enough water. I know I'm not the only one making these criticisms, so I do hope Cedar Fair takes some action here. If the loose article policy doesn't change, at the very minimum, the cups given out for water need to be larger. If you're interested, I'm working on another video like this for Cedar Point, and if that's uploaded by the time you see this, it'll be appearing on your screen right about now. Anyway, folks, that all clear means I'm up, and out of here. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you all next time.